Let's talk about it.
Hello, and welcome back to a special episode of Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaming and everything in its orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Listeners, dear listeners, if you've never listened to another episode of this podcast, please listen to this one, because we have the one and only emperor of our entire freaking community. We've got Rick.
Wow, emperor. I didn't realize. That's a whole new label. I've never heard emperor, but I'll take it for sure.
Fantastic. Well, Emperor Rick, High Lord, sfgutmuscle, Lord of the Islands of Fat, third of the name, the dynasty, etc., etc. How are you today? How are you?
I'm good. I always refer to myself as an elder statesman. I'm the elder statesman in the gaming community just because I've been around long enough to see a lot of the development for it. But I'm doing well. I'm coming to you from Washington State up on the Olympic Peninsula.
Fabulous stuff. As a non-American, I'll nod and go, yes.
Yeah, it's close to where Twilight was filmed.
Okay.
There you go. You see glittery vampires everywhere. So
I'm not saying I like the movies. I just get the reference.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the SF in my title is now not particular, just to my humble beginnings. So I'm not changing it though. It's too
iconic. It's too iconic.
And somebody will take it.
The brand has been made. But, yes. we're absolutely delighted to have you today because, of course, today is the 24th of August in the year of 2022, which makes it exactly 20 years to the day that the fabled Hard Fat documentary came out. And just before we kind of kick things off into the deep dive, I just want to ask, 20 years on, how do you feel?
It doesn't feel like 20 years have passed. I did rewatch it before we did this, and oh God, who is that little young, innocent, little chubby boy? Who is that boy? I don't know, but yeah, it doesn't seem like 20 years, but yeah, it's been a while.
It's amazing the time that has passed. And listeners, of course, sfgutmuscle is a relatively unknown character in the community. Of course, nobody knows who he is. So do yourself the favor and do some deep dive research. Find out who this hidden and mysterious figure is. Because, of course, you would have never have seen an ounce of that progress. He keeps it very much on the down low. So feel free to just revisit his back catalogue in your
very private. I only have an Instagram, YouTube, Grommr, BiggerCity. Yeah, I'm very limited in my exhibition.
Absolutely, it's your own fault, really. I mean, you were the ninth guest in line we had for the podcast. Really, we're just glad that you could make some time for us. Really.
Oh, by all means, yeah. I think it's interesting to talk about this because I do hear a lot of people say that this was a very iconic moment when they first saw it. It was one of the things when you kind of search gaming, it sometimes comes up, and I think it's an interesting project to talk about.
So, I mean, on that point, for anyone who, for God knows what reason, hasn't actually seen this documentary yet, and for the record, listeners, if you actually haven't seen it, it is free to watch on YouTube. Go and check it out after you listen to this episode, or press pause and then watch it so you know what the hell we're talking about. But for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, Rick, would you mind explaining what is the Hard Fat documentary?
So the Hard Fat documentary is a piece that was made by Frédéric Moffet, and his intention was to make a documentary to kind of explore some of the world of gainers. And it's about, I think it's like 20 minutes long. The final version features myself giving kind of interview styles, and then interlaced in it is some kind of voyeuristic scenes of CM Big Dog in both like a bookstore, eating lunch, trying on clothes, and then it culminates with him in a padded scene where he just keeps approaching the camera and taking up more and more size in that. So it's an interesting kind of dichotomy of the two, but it just kind of goes between those kind of two angles of it. So.
Love it. And Tim, I do like to make old jokes at you. As someone who was around, and a younger person when this documentary first came about, What kind of an effect did it have on you when you first saw it?
Well, so like, yeah, I have been on the Gainer, online presence for quite a long time, and I was on the original BellyBuilders website, which is where I first saw you. And so like I had seen you. I knew that you were doing like web design, right? Because you had kind of your own web space, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I started in web design.
So like I was seeing that stuff that you were putting out, and I knew who CM Big Dog was too, also from BellyBuilders. And then when this documentary came out, like this was the first time I had ever heard you speak, because it was just an image on a screen that I was worshiping, and I had no idea what kind of personality you had, or the way that you approach things. And I got to hear you speak for the first time, and it was like, oh my God.
Well, I think it also goes to say that back in that day when this came out, it was around 2002. Shockingly, you didn't upload videos. There just wasn't the quality of being able to capture it or even upload it. There just wasn't that throughput. So you really didn't have a lot of chance to do that. There were no such things as podcasts. Like we didn't have any of that technology. So yeah, knowing someone's voice and kind of getting to know them as a person, I think was very different back then than now, where, I mean, live streams happen all the time, and people post videos, TikToks. And I mean, the world is, I think what I like to think about is today, people control the media that they consume. They don't just consume media that someone else has made. And it's a really interesting place, but it'll be interesting to see how a generation that's raised on that kind of goes into their kind of depth as they grow older and start to see what that means to them. Because I went to film school. My training was in film school. So I've made a lot of small videos now that the technology has been something that you can do on your phone, and you can edit easily in things like LumaFusion and things like that. So yeah, there's so much more control now. But back then, yeah, it was just photographs and, some online chat. But there weren't large sites, and they weren't really chat related, right? They were messages back and forth, but they really were in their infancy. So it seems odd to think back to that day that's how it all started. But yeah, so we dealt with the tools we had.
Well, as a member of that younger generation, I was in high school when Facebook first came out. So for me, I am that generation of people who've been raised purely on social media, and that's very much influenced my way of communication and just all those little facets. And a little bit like how you say, we create the media we want to consume. We go back, we watch Hard Fat, we're inspired by the people who did what they did. Therefore, we invite the focal points to come on and share their experiences. And really, to that point, I'd really love to do that deep dive with you, because of course, over the years, I think we've all seen you've had opportunities to really speak to some people and say, oh, like it's a documentary I did. I think some of us have really heard that kind of typical cursory blah, 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 blah. And that's all good. And we'll do a little bit of that today. But I think what would be really awesome is to really take that opportunity to dig deep into really the impetus, where it started and how it all came together. Because having also studied film myself, these things very rarely shape up the way that we plan. So kind of taking it back to the beginning, how did you even get involved with the project to start? And what was it like?
So it was a little shocking. This Frédéric Moffet reached out to me through, I think, email or maybe one of the online forums, and just said, I'm doing this documentary about gaining, and I know that you've had a lot of stuff out there, and I'd be interested in interviewing for this documentary I'm making. And I thought, well, I said, that sounds like it's an interesting project, and we can talk more about it. And he and I talked on the phone, I believe, a little bit after that. And, he had told me originally the project was going to have like 4 to 6 different gainer people that he knew of in the community. And they would give their story. So it would kind of be a nice, kind of smattering of what everyone, had their own experiences with. I think he also wanted to get some encouragers in there, different people. And that was what he told me throughout the entire project. Until I actually saw the final cut of it, I didn't realize it was only me. So it was never meant to be the SF Gut Muscle Rick show. It just turned out that way, which I was a little shocked at, because I really thought it was going to be a much more kind of, it had a little diversity in it of opinions. But saying that, I'm also glad that the way I was able to kind of come at it, I think gave enough information for people about the basis of what gaining is and kind of some of the facets of it. But yeah, I also was very clear with him on how I wanted to approach the project. I lived in San Francisco at the time, and the kind of NPR, public PBS station that was local had a bunch of gay people that did a Pride kind of show once a week. And then during Pride Month, they'd have even a bigger kind of influence on television. And I did see a piece that they did on gayners. And they sat three guys down on a couch, and they had all this food in front of them. And they talked to them, but then all of a sudden they cut to them eating. And then they put circus music over it. Like, look at the freaks, look at these fat freaks that are eating this way. And I thought, this is what's so wrong with the gay community sometimes, is that we kind of attack each other, even though we as a group are under attack from the outside. And I just was like, how could you do that to these poor guys? And I realized they didn't understand it. They thought they were just going to be showing that they eat and they're big, and they kind of fell into that trap of like, oh, I think I'll just, show them how happy I am to be big. And the editor has the control, right? They have the ability, just as Frederick did, to say it's going to be a lot of people, and it only turned out to be one person. So I explained to him, like, listen, all I'm going to do is do a head and shoulders interview, which is all you see in that. And then I will give you pictures and video that have already been put out on the internet that you can use. And if there's any other photographs around that, but you won't get nudity, you will not get pictures of me eating. I'm not going to eat for you. I'm not going to go through some scenario of this is me in a gaining moment or being fed like a pig and all that stuff. I'm not doing it because I've seen people, taken advantage of and had their image manipulated in that way. And he agreed to that. And so you'll see in that final production that it's very much just an interview style type thing. And then he has the pictures that he can kind of go through. And I always shot all my own, still to this day do. I don't have a camera, and people ask me all the time, who's your production team? I'm like, well, that's me. The camera does have a timer on it. So a lot of times I would just put it on a tripod and shoot it. So he was actually able to animate some photographs because I'd have 6 or 7 photos that were all from the same angle. So he could easily kind of just make them look like they were a motion or from a video. So, but that's kind of how it came about, is him just contacting me and me saying, yes, I'll agree to do it. But there are certain things we need to have as ground rules, because I'm not going to allow you to have that moment where you can manipulate how I'm seen or what you think of me if there is a different way you're giving a perception.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, Tim and I watched a documentary recently, and we've been trying to go through more than hard fat, really, just kind of seeing what's out there in the world of just documentaries about fatness in general. And it's one by a London-based documentarian called Connor Luke Simpson, called The Dark Side of Fat Acceptance, which was a very, in my opinion, poor piece he put together in response to a documentary he'd already made called Fattopia, which was also poorly put together. And it's funny, you mentioned that moment of gainers sat on a couch, put in front of food, and then they're eating, and then circus music on top. And in the documentary, there's actually a moment where he puts out a notice to fat liberation activists online, anyone who's willing to sit down with him and explain to him why fat acceptance is a good thing. And there's a girl who I shan't name, who actually does a very beautiful job of explaining what fat liberation is and why people who work in the fat liberation space often find themselves at odds with documentarians and interviewers, because there is this pre-existing bias towards fat acceptance. And at the end of it, he even says, yeah, she raises some good points, but then I wonder why people get really upset about fat people. Oh, I don't know, because it's unhealthy. And then over the oh god, I forget what the score is called, but it's like a Flight of the Bumblebees or whatever it is, and then it's like all of those typical fake facts about how 2 million people are dying of obesity every year, and hypertension and cardiac, and then it's still shots of fat people choking on donuts. So absolutely, that kind of narrative, that manipulation of the truth, and that power of the editor is very, very true, even up until this day. So much like what you were saying, there is something very important for all of us to be aware of when we step outside of the community and engage in people who have power outside of that. We are surrendering our control, and we are surrendering our influence in that moment. So we need to be.
Well, and I think too, everyone, it's funny, I just had a conversation with a friend of mine, and his whole moment of kind of discovery was, should I start OnlyFans? People want me to do an OnlyFans. Should I do one? And I said, you sadly in this world have to think of yourself as a brand. What's your brand? who do you want to be to people, and how do you represent yourself? So I personally do not do any nudity. I don't do any pornography. I don't do any eating. I won't be on all fours eating out of a trough or a plate or anything like that, because these things have legs and they can go far and wide, and people can pick them up and do with them what they want. And they can influence your job. They can influence your family, your friends. Like, this is not something that you necessarily want everyone to see. So I've always come at it as, I'll show you pictures of me in what would be, oh, I was in a locker room and saw him changing in his underwear. Oh, I was on the beach and saw him in some little skimpy whatever, but he's just fat, and he's proud of his fatness, so he's not hiding it. So if anyone did find any of the content that I have, they'd say, look at that. I'd be like, what? That's just me being fat, and I'm gay, so I'm showing off my body. If you have a problem with that, that, at least in this country, has laws that protect it, of me having free speech and my ability to show myself off. There's nothing that an employer can say about that represents a brand. Plus, I don't try to get my employer involved in those situations. So, but I think it's very important for people to think, you have a brand. Is like it or not, we all have a brand when we go out there, because people perceive you from the pictures you post, the online, kind of stuff that you do, and every word builds the story that is you. So you have to think about that, and you can control it to a certain degree, because they can only build weapons out of the blocks that you give them. So they can only fight you back with what you did. If they say you did something, you're like, show me the video, show me the picture where it's inappropriate. And as long as you have been very careful about making sure that's the way it is, that can be a much kind of more controlled situation. But, at the same time, people can always use it some way, but you hope that that's not going to happen. And, it stays within a certain community, which it tends to. I've had very good luck with that so far. Only a few people have stolen my image for some weight loss stuff. There's a power lifter who was making fun of his friend that he thought was a fatty, and they actually used a picture of me with his face pasted on it. But, I didn't even go after them, because I was like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Like, it's just going to go away and no one's going to care. So, but yeah, I think, controlling your image is a big part of it. And I was very aware with this project that I needed to make sure that I could do that. But even to those ends, I did not have control of it. And in the end, it was put in places that I had never approved of it being put, and was never told it could be put in. So it's a little bittersweet to know that that's kind of how that went down. So but I still think it's a good project.
No, absolutely. I'd very much agree with that. I mean, Tim, you and I have had conversations recently about, the concept of branding and this concept of personal image, and how it gets attached to this sense of personal responsibility. And sometimes people can be deified because of this idea that they present. I mean, hearing a little bit of what Rick is saying, like, how does that resonate with you?
Well, like Rick was saying, it does make me very aware of what I put out all the time now. I mean, when I was first on Grommr, Beefy Frat, I wasn't really paying much attention to that. I was young, and since gaining some traction on Instagram, now I'm like, oh, I have to be very measured about anything I say, because people will take something and they will run with it. And I feel that I've done a decent job thus far, and I hope I keep it up. I mean, we all stumble. Like, sometimes things happen and you do something in a moment, but, I guess I've been kind of lucky there too.
Fair dues. I'm curious to know, Rick, you say you've rewatched it even just today. I want you to reflect back on the first time that you saw it from start to finish. And while I understand, as you say, that there were changes, amendments to the final piece that you weren't aware were going to be the case, overall, how did it make you feel the first time you really saw it from start to finish?
I thought it was a really positive piece. Again, he said it was a documentary, and in the final kind of product that he produced, he calls it an experimental film. Which I would agree more than it being just a documentary, because of the kind of voyeuristic scenes that are in there, kind of him typing along. So it feels a little bit more like that, with a little bit of a documentary kind of put through it. But I think he did handle it well. I felt like I was well represented. I felt like he understood what I was saying enough to pick out the clips of things that I said that kind of gave the flavor of why I do gaining, why I was interested in gaining, and then also kind of the pitfalls and some of the things that, he touched on the health stuff, but he didn't. I felt like what I really appreciated about it was he didn't come with a and I think you had kind of addressed this when you talked about those two other pieces, he didn't come with a preconceived notion about what gaining is. He let the piece kind of do the talking and didn't editorialize on top, like, well, even though he says this is what he should really be aware of. There was no layer in that way. So I was really pleased to see that, because that's always the concern, is that someone will somehow put it together and give you, a different meaning, or yes, he said this, but now I'm going to tell you what I think. So he really didn't have that in that. And even seeing it again today, I felt very strongly that he did a good job of letting the piece kind of represent itself, even in with the kind of the fantasy elements, even that padding thing with seeing Big Dog. He lets it go on for long enough that you really have to watch it. You have to see it. And it is there long enough for you to, in the beginning, think maybe it's comical, then maybe think, oh, it's kind of cool. And then as he gets closer to you and just kind of lives there for that moment, I think, it becomes more and more of it. Although it's an odd, juxtaposition, because before you were the voyeur of this man, and now suddenly he's in a space. So that's why it's such an experimental thing. There's no narrative there that kind of connects that to an end, like, oh, I finally got him, because there's writings in a journal about, oh, I saw him again, and it's not. But I think as a piece, I think it holds up. And I think when I first saw it, I felt the same way, that it was great. And I was comfortable that he was going to show it at a couple of film festivals as an experimental film, and that was his intent. Now, sadly, after that, I learned that he sold it to a few universities, and they actually had it in their psychology department. And I did have a few people actually come up to me in public and say, wait, I think I know you. Weren't you in that documentary about gaining that I saw in my human studies course? And I was like, oh my God, what? And that's when I realized it's in the library of several universities, and they bought it as part of their human studies on fetishes and sexuality and things like that, which was never the intent. That was never it. And then for a while, he was, at least I was told, was selling it because you couldn't get, video online. He was selling like VHS copies of it to people and making a profit off of it, which we had talked about, that this is not going to be a for sale product. So, and again, I was never told like, oh yes, I'm going to sell it, and by the way, I'll give you a percentage because you're basically it. So that was a little disconcerting, and I was like, that's not how this was supposed to happen. Like, I'm not your piece of property to put out there and sell, and you told me it was only going to be at film festivals. That's not selling it to colleges. So that's why there's a little bittersweet end on it, because he never reached out to me afterward. He never apologized. He never contacted me. It was just, okay, that's just what I'm doing with it. And I'm like, I guess, but again, I was young. I should have known to sign documents that would say that they couldn't be used in this way, that he couldn't do that, that if he did, put a price tag on it, that I would be somehow compensated for it. But, it is what it is. And it's kind of not really gone that far and wide. He certainly hasn't become a millionaire off of it. So, it's, and again, it hasn't fallen into the wrong hands or something, but yeah, it's okay, but I still stand by that. I think it's a positive piece, and enough people have seen it that I think they have benefited from it being kind of a very measured, kind of good entryway to it without it being editorialized. So I still stand by what I think back then. It's a good piece.
It's funny, you mentioned that element of, with the padding, how he lets the scene go on and it kind of forces you to engage with it. It reminds me, there's a James Cameron movie called The Abyss. I think it was back in 1989. And there is this very famous revival scene where one of the characters has been underwater for too long and they're trying to revive him. And typically speaking, a lot of cinema uses that rule of three. It's the fake, it's the this, it's the that, and then they're awake or they're dead. It's one or the other. But the scene actually goes on for minutes, and it forces...
Ed Harris just beat the crap out of that poor woman, whoever she was. I don't remember the actress's name, but he is just beating the shit out of her.
But it forces you to be there in that moment, and it creates this tension within you as a viewer going, this is just never ending. Is she going to be okay? Is she going to be okay? And then in the end, it is okay. And the collective sigh of relief is visceral that you feel because the scene just goes on and on. So there is something to be said about using that for integrity to really invest someone in a moment. And something, much like you say, it's an experimental film. It's the fact that it's not just that it explores gaining. It forces the viewer for just a moment to actually experience various aspects of gaining through the eyes of that perspective. So it forces the viewer to become the voyeur. it forces the viewer to become the micro who's watching see Big Dog walking down padded bigger, bigger, bigger at every conceivable moment. And that to me is very informative of how some of us maybe watch that and determine particular kinks of our own. So
Right.
it's interesting how that happens. I know that you've said, it's a film that a lot of people kind of treat as like baby's first introduction to gaming, and it's good that there's stuff they got right. I want to ask, do you feel like there's anything major that they got wrong?
I would say not really, because of the length of it, and it wasn't really intended to be any kind of a deep dive. It was just kind of, what are your thoughts? I'd also have to say, it would have been good to see, if one thing was done wrong, I think, again, it would have been better to get more people involved and to make sure that there were multiple perspectives, because it really is just one person's idea. I think at the time that he approached me and that we did that film, I'd had enough experience. But now, 20 years on from it, I have so much more experience that I can see it would certainly be helpful to hear from other people, even if it's the same message, to just strengthen that. See, everybody agrees that this is what that experience is, as opposed to one person. But I think, again, because it's such a fetishy kind of thing that people feel, and they feel kind of, society pushes against them. Even I think one clear voice that, again, isn't porn, isn't a guy sitting and eating and slapping his belly. I mean, that's a very different message. And we see that now, right? You see lots of people creating content, but it's really about them addressing you in that area of like, look at me, look, it is a bit of a porn angle of it, soft porn, if we can use that term, but it's not, no one really makes videos that are informative about how they feel about gaming, right? It usually slides into a more erotic kind of, but I think a lot of that is a known factor of generating content for views, for monetary use, for growing an audience. So I think people know that's what you do. The documentary channels are not breaking the bank. They're not ones getting millions of dollars. So I think if they did get something wrong, it was just not having that multi perspective. But again, I think it still, it serves its purpose in getting people at the time too. There was no voice for gaming in that way, especially in a video. You'd have to really find the documents or the websites on your own.
Tim, to defer to you for a moment, because again, you're of a certain age when you first came across it. In your time since then, and having revisited the film together years later, putting that question out there to you, do you feel like there are quintessential elements to gaming that have been missed from that documentary?
I don't know if necessarily missed, because I feel like, the core tenets were touched on, and to watch it was like being in a time capsule, because I was seeing those websites that don't exist anymore. And I'm like, I remember being on that website. I think overall though, it lacked a deep dive, but in only 20 minutes, you can only scratch the surface of anything, So I feel like they did with the time allotted, they covered as much as they could.
Yeah, and I don't think there was an intent to it either. It was just about gaining, so they weren't trying to necessarily prove a point, or so I'm not sure there was an overall objective. So whatever came out of it, I think, is what it is, right? It's just kind of that kind of piece, which I think is okay. And again, it was very early on. Like there were no big tools too. He brought a whole VHS camera and all this stuff. So I mean, it wasn't now today, like sit down in front of my phone and just tell me and I'll cut it into a video in 10 minutes. No. This was a very involved thing with a boom mic and everything. So yeah.
Yes, I reflect on days in film school and truly being very grateful, because having film teachers who would wag their finger and go, back in my day, we had to cut the film manually and glue it together, and you'd have to roll it and reel it and run it through the machine. And you just go, oh my God, please stop talking about Kenneth Branagh. We know he was fantastic. Just stop, please.
a lot. I went to film school and I cut 16 millimeter film. We used to use those things, and then people started using video. Now today it's like, oh my God, I just edited that on my phone in 5 minutes and can send it to someone. It's insane. It's insane. But to that end, I'm surprised that no one is creating more documentary type footage around it. But I'm not sure the space is a scholarly, tenant. I think it's more about people showing off their gaining and talking about it, and it still lives in a bit of a fetishy world of that. I mean,
we know what the boys come for. We know what the boys come for.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and you see the people who come new, and I know a lot of people are just so pissed at some of the content that people make that's so like gainer but not gainer, like the Bobo Bruno guy, who is just like, I've gained 50 pounds and look at me, should I be fat still? And I'm like, oh, be quiet. And he's showing to that point, but he's not going to go that big. He just doesn't have that.
He'll lose it all and get a fitness like deal out of it, or a book deal or something.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I mean, Jesus Christ, have we not flogged this subject, Tim? Our rants to each other. It's certainly a conversation point about, not to say the legitimacy of gaining, but it almost kind of brings up this point of like, God, when we have such a strong pornographic focus, sometimes it really does feel like we put ourselves in the corner where we're so used to just jerking off to what's in front of us that we really don't take the time to kind of question the source or question the quality of it. But I think that's its own conversation. As you said before, a man of your substantial dimensions, of course, requires regular maintenance.
Oh my goodness, yes. Too much. Where's my house? I don't know why. Whatever. Oh, there you go. Oh God, what is going on? It's like an experimental film on its own. Like I see half your head, the other part of your head is over there. Like, what is going on? Let me see if I can fix it. Not that it's that important, but you know how that goes. All right, let me see now. Did I force it to do it? No. All right, there you are. Well, I guess we'll go with this, right? That'll be okay. There we go. All right. Now I got the 3.
Huzzah! 3 generations of gaining here on the screen, making it happen. It's funny you mentioned that thing of like, trying to focus and get it so that we're all on the screen to have that conversation. We actually had someone ask us once, like, mind you, they were very careful about their image. This isn't going to be released, right? And I'm like, yes, it's a podcast, it's an audio medium. But the point of talking face to face is because this really does encourage conversation, because it's how that works. You see a person, you talk to the person, it invokes a more personable narrative, Yeah.
I think that's one of the questions, that people have had is, should there be a hard fact 2? Should there be an updated version of that? And I'm not sure it needs to actually exist, only in that we have podcasts, we have video chat, we have live streams. And I think those are a better way to kind of do that kind of almost, monthly, weekly catch up and have more voices involved in it, right? Where again, it's not just media that you stick out there and then everyone comments in the comment section. It's nice to kind of have the live feedback. I'll do Instagram live chats every once in a while. And, sometimes, yes, it's the same question over and over again, but it does give me a chance to kind of address things live and kind of give people the perspective, especially if they come at it in a way that, they're troubled about their gaining or something like that, where I may not have addressed that from my perspective, but they can ask it and everyone else can be like, oh, see, this is what this is what it is to be the first person in your world. You're young and you're just interfacing it. I always have to stop myself because I get really mad at Thanksgiving. That butterball turkey line, who doesn't know how to make a damn turkey? And I'm like, oh, the 18-year-old that's just got out of college and has never had a house and never had a pan and never made their own Thanksgiving meal. That's who that's for. It's not for me. Step away, settle down, go have something to eat, just calm down. So
I do kind of want there to be something of a spiritual successor to Hard Fat or something along those lines, because I want to direct it. So like...
There you go. Well, I mean, I'm not saying we can't do it. I'm just saying, it would be a nice kind of bookend to have the two together. But I think, we definitely have that conversation out there more. Not that we've learned more as a community, but there's definitely more space for that to be created and easier to do. we could shoot it in a weekend and it could be out that week.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and we could do it across distance. You wouldn't have to travel. He came all the way and visited me in San Francisco. He made a whole trip for it. So, but yeah.
Beautiful. But I like that because that's the gainer dynamic. The gainer dynamic is I'm the fat boy. I sit here. You come to me, not the other way around.
I'm gonna expend calories on this. Come on, no, and bring muffins with you. What are you like? If you ever show a gainer's house and you don't have some food with you as an offering, yeah, you go home and read the book. You really gotta keep up with that.
Yeah, I have a partner who's a civilian, and he's also a very lazy person, and I constantly have to try to be like, can you please get up and get me a snack? He's like, why can't you get it? And I have to be like, mate, I am a gainer. I'm trying to not eat calories to do it. Fuck.
A little encouragement here. We should get t-shirts that say that. A little encouragement here.
Yeah, it's and then in the Blanche Devereaux, it's like tool and teeth just to try to get a little tiny compliment out of you.
I've always relied on the excess calories of strangers.
Now that's a quote. I've always relied on the excess calories of strangers. I love that. Also, can we do a goal while we're on the subject of cinematic releases? There's the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now there's going to be the Gaining Cinematic Universe, the GCU. Can we talk about a remake of the Golden Girls? With different gainer encouraging characters, all having
the Grodin girls. So
exactly. Oh my goodness.
That could be very interesting with them all having a gainer perspective, but also that same Golden Girls perspective.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Listeners, you may not know this, but after this, we're taking Rick straight direct to a pitch meeting we've got with a couple of producers down the street, and we're going to try and get all of these rolling and hopefully onto your TV screens in the next financial year. So
I think there's a Patreon site in this, I'm just saying.
I mean, I'm hoping that we infiltrate, that we create enough media.
Fun. Is this not 2022? Hello.
I'm hoping that we can eventually get to a point where there's enough media, and I'm going to preface that it will be good media, that we can create an entire channel out of this.
Oh my goodness, absolutely.
I think people need to have an audience that they feel exists who wants to consume it. I mean, I've always felt that that's, again, going back to the whole idea of how you present yourself as a package. I don't feel I have to do anything pornographic or sexual because I have 20 years of material that I can sit on and say, listen, I can show you videos from the early 2000s. I have pictures I'm a picture whore. I've taken so many pictures of myself at different stages. I have just tons and tons of media. And if you don't like it and you want more, you'll have to visit someone else, because I'm just not going to create what you want. I'm going to create what I want, and I'll share it with you. And I think that's a very different perspective than people are hungry and maybe this is not a good way to put it for the gaining world. People are hungry and they want to be fed. And you're just like, well, I'm not going to feed you that. I'm like, oh, how selfish. How dare you? Life's a buffet.
So as a point of curiosity, you mentioned a little bit about, if there was a sequel, you don't really feel like there needs to be one. I totally get that. Hard Fat was its own piece, its own time, its own subject. Boom, it is what it is. But let's say someone approaches you and says, whether you like it or not, they're going to make a sequel. What would you want out of a product like that?
I would think that if we did a Hard Fat today, I think, again, because I've thought of it. I thought it myself. I said, oh, I should make one, right? There's nothing that says I can't. I could give it a different name, but it could be that type of thing. But then I realized, again, that would be me and my one-sided perspective making something that could potentially be much more explorative if other people were involved. Because I think we have to get into, how do young people see it when they first come onto it? How is the experience of the older generation now that we've been through it and we're kind of in our, as I say, elder statesman career of this gaining world? What does it mean to have that perspective? And to, I don't know how many people have said, oh, someday I'll feed you till you're immobile. I mean, I've already gotten very big and it's probably not going to happen. So where do you think that's going? And how that works itself out. What's your expectation in a gaining world? How do you see it? And I don't think we got into that at all in that video, because I don't think we really had the depth of it. But, relationships, there are now, I think back then there weren't relationships necessarily based on gaining. Now there are, but I think some people, want to explore that. can they? And is it more about being a chaser, an encourager? But I think that would be a much richer kind of version of hard fat too, is to really not just update where did we come from there, but what have we learned, and how, maybe even exploring, you know, how is our community maybe detrimental to itself, and maybe what can we learn from it, and what should we learn for it, and almost open ourselves up to say, can we change something? So Hard Fat 3, we're talking about the success of all of these questions we asked. I think that would be much more interesting, and again, multifaceted. You know, more voices, I think, will only show us the commonality we have, and I think that will also help us kind of maybe also avoid the pitfalls of the common issues we find with the gaming community, because there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of expectations by people, and there's a lot of, you know, fantasy fetish that is just not addressed by people, and they don't sometimes I don't think they even realize it's there. They're just doing what they're doing without thinking about it, and I think that would be interesting to explore as well. But I think that's, again, your podcast does that, right? That's what that's about. So I think there again is that, you know,
I was going to bring up, you know, for the list, you know, for people listening, with what Rick is saying about expectations, we actually have an episode on managing expectations from season 1. I believe it's episode 5.
Something very early on. But honestly, Rick, even as you're like trilling through certain things, like, you know, the whole question on immobility, my 500 pounds life, we were talking to someone who like constantly gets that form of question. And it's just interesting, right? Like, sometimes I think to myself, and this is me personally, why did we start this podcast? Because no one was having these types of conversations. And yet this is just everything that we deal with. You know, someone once said, like, how can you make a podcast about gaining? It's just about getting fat. Like, the existence of getting fat and becoming fat affects literally every area of your life, which means, technically speaking, there are an infinite number of episodes that we can do focusing on
and the very fact that the people involved in the encouraging side of it necessarily don't have any, I think I touched on that in that film, and I feel as strong as I ever did then, is that for many encouragers, it's the dirty little secret that they can walk away from and never be seen in that way. Yet when I gain 50, 100, 200 pounds, you see me getting fat and you want to know why. And you can ask that question. You can see the result. The encourager, you don't see that on them. So, you know, it's that classic issue of, like, you know, where do you have the support when, but I think a lot of it goes into, you know, again, the pride of, do you feel that you yourself love yourself fat? Is it about you being fat? Is it about somebody making you fat? It's a, you know, there's much, and I think that's why a podcast does exist for it. There's a lot of levels of things. I always say that the saddest part is I meet many guys who say they're gainers, but in actuality, they have just given up with their weight loss issues and have just decided to be a gainer, but they're not. They're emotionally eating, and they're troubled in their life, and they need to work that out, and they need to do it from a loving place. Like, listen, I'm not going to discourage you from the gaining thing, but realize if you're not happy, you're not going to help anyone be in love with you or have a relationship or a friendship with you if you're not enjoying the process. And that's a big part of it too. But again, some of that also skirts on the edge of, do you like to be humiliated? Is it that, you know, there's a lot of nuance to it. So I think it's good to talk about it, because I think some people, again, they don't even think that that's part of the gaining world. And for them to have it discussed by other people opens up their eyes to, oh, maybe I need to think about that. But, you know, there's
that
a
type
lot
of man that you were talking about, you know, the kind that just sort of like gives up and is like, well, I like my food, you know, I'm not really a gainer, but I'm obviously very big, as you can tell, and I don't intend to like try to lose the weight. That's like 90% of the big boys that I hooked up with. That kind of situation.
I mean, even with how I've represented myself online, I've always shown my belly off. I've always shown my fat acceptance of myself. I'm big. I like it. And I'd like you to interface with me as being big. In fact, I don't like it when you don't. Like, you have to live with me as a fat person. I've had guys that just won't touch me in those ways and access my fat. And when I inquire about it, I'm like, what's going on? They're like, well, I know big guys don't like their bellies touched. I'm like, number one, have you looked at my profile? Like, have you looked at my content? I don't think I'm that person. And whoever you've run into, then you're running into people who are not happy being fat, and you need to have that conversation with them before you get to that point. To just avoid it seems so odd to me. Like, why are you with a fat? And also, why are you representing yourself as a confident fat guy when you are not? You know it's going to come up. You're going to attract those people that want to just grab onto you. And if they can't, that's just a disappointment for everyone. So,
so you're telling me that somebody had you in front of them and did not want to touch. I'm sorry, but I'm gooped. I'm gooped.
They thought they weren't allowed. They didn't think I liked it. And I was like, what are you?
Absolutely mad. We've had this conversation before. I reflect on my twink days when, I was just a chaser. That was all I was doing. I wasn't at the gaining stage of realization for me yet, and I was chasing every big boy that I could track down. And of course, every typical big boy had some kind of a problem with their body. And I thought I was revolutionary because I was going around going, let me tell you about something I'd created in my brain called body worship, which is where I'm just going to take you, I'm just going to love on your body. And it very rarely involved penis contact. It very rarely involved head, oral, anal, anything like that. It was purely about the body. And I would oftentimes, not trying to do my own horn here, make these men shoot ropes without even touching their dick, because they would just lay there and go, oh my God, you made my body feel incredible in ways that I never knew that I could feel. And I'm sat there, of course, going, ha, look at me go, look at me do what I do. Now, on the other side of things, putting on my own weight, realizing, Christ, this feels good. And in a world in which, and look, to listeners, this speaks to the true depth and impression of fat phobia, where as a bigger person, look, the gelatinousness, the bigness and everything, it is just a goddamn turn on. And if you don't believe it is, you're not looking at it right. But that's the point of fat phobia. That is the power of it. A body that literally is designed to feel incredible, we can be taught feels disgusting, feels abhorrent. We want to avoid, we want to cover it up in shame, because that is the scope and scale of what we are combating and what we are fighting. And in many ways, one of the reasons why we need to have more conversations about the ways in which gaining and feedism fit into fat liberation and why that's really important, because there are plenty of people who aren't actually gainers. They're just naturally fat, either because they just don't care or their happenstance lifestyle turn them that way. And in a world where nobody gives a shit about you getting fat, they'd probably be totally on board for a bit of casual body worship, casual body play. They'd be like, yeah, this is normal for me. I'm not looking to get any bigger, but thank God for the people who like this. This feels incredible. And so this is why we got to work towards that,
Honestly, I've come to this kind of realization. I think this is true, although I have no evidence to back it up. I believe that everyone enjoys eating, and I believe that many, at least men, would enjoy having a belly and being bigger. But I think what makes this whole thing so negative and so twisted is society has told them, no, it's not healthy. But the other side of it is, I think there's a perception that if I start to gain weight, I'll never stop. And I will be that immobile person in the bed. And that's not necessarily true. If someone relaxed from their gym, started eating healthily, big portions, having a nice full belly, we all know that you hit a plateau. Unless you start to push yourself to that next level, you're not going to go past the 250, past the 300, past the 350. You have to keep upping it as you go. So you'll hit a natural plateau. And I think, as I've seen, there are a lot of guys, and straight guys too, that get to a certain size and their wife are always got their hands on them. And I think that's that moment of like, she accepts me as fat. In my world, I'm okay as fat. I've gotten this big and I'm not getting bigger. That's where it is. And I think that's a real part of it. It's the fear that you will never stop gaining that prevents a lot of guys from just letting the fat come on and having a dad bod. Because it's not necessarily that I just have to look at this way. It's like, I have to fight it or I'm going to be immobile and I'm going to die. And it's like, you can eat healthily, you can eat big, and you can have some exercise and still have your body be okay. But I think there's so many people, but I really think that's an issue. I think there's a lot of people like, well, you'll just keep getting fat. I've had a lot of guys say to me like, well, I don't want to, they stopped dating me after a while. And I'm like, whatever happened to us? And they're like, well, you were just going to get immobile. And I'm like, I never said that. We never had that conversation. We never had that adult conversation of, why don't you ask me and I'll tell you, and then you'll understand where we're at. And that also, I might adjust that for a partner to only say, I'll get this big. It's part of that discussion that doesn't happen because I think people are afraid or just not knowledgeable that you are in control of your sex, you're in control of your relationships, and talking about them is not something weird. But I really do think that most guys would want to be big. I think women wouldn't mind being big as long as they knew that they'd be a certain size and it would stop. Again, I think emotional eating is where a lot of this goes off the rails, and that's where people tend to get bigger and bigger because they're just stuffing it in to fill that hole. but you need to address that. That's not gaining. That's a medical issue that you need to talk about. I feel like I'm in control of my body, and if a health scare came up, I could change my diet and the force feeding that I'm doing. I'm actively feeding myself, so I could get to a place where I'm in a more healthy state. And that's important, I think, for gaining. You need to know that. But no, I think, there's a lot of layers of stuff in there. But I've started to think that, I think it's the people think they just wouldn't stop gaining. And we know it's not true. I mean, we have evidence. We've done this.
Again, I come back to this. This is the importance of gaining in fat liberation, because so much of the argument about fat liberation is, you're allowed to like yourself as a fat person now because, you hated yourself as a fat person, but you're allowed to love yourself now because you're either going to stay the same weight or maybe you'll lose weight like Adele and all the other good fatties did. You loved yourself enough to lose some weight. You're allowed to be fat, but only if you either stay that way or lose weight. Because, of course, who on earth would want to gain weight? And that's where we need to come into the ranks and go, ding, ding, us. We're the ones doing it intentionally. Thank you very much. And let us explain to you why that's a good thing. It's that narrative, and it's something that I like to talk to people about. We have so much cultural ideology. Weight loss is a good thing. It's a sign of self-confidence. It could be for medical reasons. It could be for an acting role. There's all these narratives about why weight loss is a good thing. But you think about the concept of weight gain, there is not one narrative, and I challenge you, think of one in modern Western society in which getting fat is a good thing. Even pregnancy, for Christ's sake. People are like, you're allowed to get pregnant because pregnancy looks like fat, but you're not actually getting fat. You have to wear Grommr and stretch fit just for the sake that you're only going to be that way for 9 months, because afterwards you're going to hit the gym and you're going to lose the baby weight, shredding before the wedding, losing weight after the baby. It's all that kind of ridiculous narrative. Like, women aren't even allowed to be fat when they're pregnant. For Christ's sake, they need fat, huge, bloody, milky tits to feed the children. That's what it was there for. And they're not allowed to have it. It's that entire conversation. And, Rick, someone like yourself, like you say, you've got 20 years of this back catalogue where you've really shown that evidence. I kind of want to ask here, right? Just putting that little note on it there. What is that one thing, right, to any gainer, no matter what stage of the journey they're at, no matter who's listening, what is the one thing you want to tell people about it all?
I would say the one thing is you need to know that you're doing it because you want to do it, and that you love to see your body gaining and changing in size, and that you're setting yourself up for a happy life being fat, not by accident or not by shame. I think the fact that I'm confident of my weight gain, no matter if it was just gaining 50 pounds in the beginning to gaining the hundreds of pounds I've gained so far, it's about having the confidence to go out in the world and address yourself as, hi, I'm this big fat guy you see in front of me, and I'm okay with it. And a lot of times that solves many of the problems that people don't come after you about it if you address it with a waitress ahead of time. Let me find you a seat. I need a table. I'm not built for a booth. That immediately puts her in that, he gets he's a fat guy. He gets that he's a certain size. We're going to be okay now. I don't have to skirt around that. When they ask me, did you save for room for dessert? I would say, look, I'm built for dessert. Like, that's who I am, right? But again, it lets them feel more kind of, and I think people feel that energy, that you're relaxed. You don't show yourself off. I also think that if you keep yourself, and maybe this is, a little pretentious in a way, but if you keep yourself neat and tidy, you also don't give off this vibe of, I'm a hopeless fat person that's just killing myself, right? So, having a haircut, having yourself shaved in a certain way, so at least you have presentable, you wear some clothes that look like they're meant to fit you, and they're not just like I got off the couch with stained, sweats. I think it shows people like, yes, I can dress myself. I can take care of myself. I am taking care of myself. I'm just a bigger guy doing it, right? Having that confidence in yourself and loving yourself is the first step to this. Because if you are not confident about it, if you do not have that settled within yourself, you'll never be able to find somebody who will love you if you don't love you. I mean, that's a kind of cheesy old statement, but I think it's very true to it, that's what you have to do. And you have to also be true to yourself. Decide how big you want to get, decide what you want out of it, not what the world wants out of it, not what the internet begs you to do and get bigger and bigger and eat. Everyone, how much you weigh, how big are you now, what shirt are you wearing? I'm doing what I'm doing. And that's what you got to, I think that's my advice is be sure what you want to do is what you want to do and do it proudly and do it as healthily as you can. And I think that's a discussion to have too, but it's all possible. But that's how you become, you know, an elder statesman of fatness with a healthy attitude about it, and not a lot of, slays at your back that people have, judged you, or, and be ready for those conversations, well, that's your choice to say what you want to say, but I'm confident with who I am. So it makes it easier.
Oh, so much just, so much good content.
Preach, girlfriend, preach.
As it snaps the house down, boots, yes, God, mama, wig,
he one arms the entire buffet into a bag and walks out.
Exactly. You can't see it, but
good night.
But Rick is currently voguing, he's catwalking, duck walking out of the buffet, just letting you have it.
Open both doors, fellas. I'm on my way out.
Oh my goodness. I mean, look, I feel like we've touched on so much, my God. And to really bring it back to hard fat for a minute here, because this is really where this all began. What an incredible film at the end of the day. What an awesome opportunity to really introduce the world to gaining. And like you say, as much as there have been those challenges along the way, as much as there have been those things that have happened as a result of it where it's not gone the way that you would have wanted it to have gone, acknowledging the good that it's done so many people. Like, I want to ask maybe a bit of a cheesy question to kind of round things out here. Like, what do you really hope for the gainer community of the future?
Oh, the gainer community of the future. Well, definitely like to float around. Yeah, definitely the ability to float around like in WALL-E, so you can just be served. There's my future. Oh God, I see babies in strollers all the time, and I say, "Why are you crying? Someone's pushing you around, feeding you all day. Shut up! Come on, find me a stroller that fits me and push me around and let me doze off when I want and wake me up when there's food. Come on." Well, I would say I would hope that we come out of an infancy of gaining and do have more of the conversations that express that we want relationships, not just fetish moments, that we want intimacy, not sex, that we don't just approach each other like most gay men do, stick it in and go. It's more about like, let's build a community. Let's have each other's backs as wide as they are. And let's have friendships instead of just constantly feeding off of, not literally, that energy of it just being sexual. Because I think that's a bigger issue as also in the gay community, that we tend to see ourselves through the lens of our sex defines us, but I think our intimacy and our relationships define us. And I think the love that we can have for each other is more important, and you need to find someone who sees it the same way you do, so you have a supportive, nurturing relationship. That includes you gaining weight and getting bigger, as opposed to it just being this fantasized, fetishized idea, because all that does is force us into those moments where we don't build the relationships, and we're all then clinging to this idealized thing that, well, if I let them feed me until I'm immobile, then maybe it will work, or I'll spend an entire weekend with a guy and he'll feed me all the time, and then you get together and it doesn't happen because it's not realistic. We go to the market, we go to the store, we go to the movies, and in those moments, you're just not going to have a tube down your throat. It's just not how it happens. So I think I would like to see us focus a little bit more on getting to know each other and understanding each other, as opposed to it just being fetishized and put in that only sexualized way, because that's when we'll build bridges that are strong enough to
will be something of a natural progression for a lot of us. Like, for the younger ones, maybe not, but like the older I'm getting, the less I'm giving into lust. So like, I'm realizing that actual connections are more important than just, having a fun time. So, but I feel like that's cyclical too, though. Younger generations, the hormones are still racing.
Sure. And I'm not saying it's bad to have the fetish moment or the excitement moment or the role play moments. It's not that that's not allowed or shameful. It's you can't build your life on that if you're really looking for a connection, a relationship. What I would love us to see is to have a different platform than just Grommr, where it is more about the aspect of community, because I don't think Grommr's a community. I think Grommr is a little bit of a thirst trap. It's a little bit of this is the only place I can go right now to find this. And they're intentionally not trying to get in the way of people, and it naturally is just becoming a dive bar, right?
A reminder to people that Beefy Frat, the new Beefy Frat, is now live, and so there actually is another official platform that people can start to build community on.
This episode brought to you by Beefy Frat and all the people.
If only. If only.
Can you imagine? All those stereotypical podcast things where it's like, let me talk to you about Squarespace. We joked about this right at the start of the podcast. Wouldn't it be fabulous if you just had McDonald's or Squatty, Hello Tushy or Tell Just Be Day, just relevant things marketing through gainers for these kinds of. I think that would be honestly fantastic.
By the great people of CPAP.
Yeah.
Gainer breed.
Oh my goodness.
Get all your cables and face masks today. And for 10% discount, just say Piggy. It's
use code PIG at checkout.
Oh my God, yes.
Wow. Rick, can I just say this has been a truly phenomenal episode. I think I speak for both Tim and I. We've been very excited to have you on. I'm sure anyone listening is just over the moon to have the opportunity to hear more from you. Selfishly, I'll put it out there. If you ever want to come back and chat about fucking anything, please let us know, and we will happily have you on at the drop of a hat, because, in such a short time, I really feel like you've thrown out so much, not only your own experiences, but just wisdom, knowledge, understanding. And I think it just all comes back to that,
Well, I'm really glad that you did reach out to me, because I do think that this is a really important little film that got made, and I'm honored that you wanted me to give you kind of the heads up on it. But I'm one of the only people in it, so it's a weird.
And
on
a personal note, should I ever meet you should I ever meet you, I will happily be buried under your belly if you will allow it.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah. Let me put you down. Now, there's a package that I can offer for.
I know that I haven't had much of a presence in this episode, listeners, but it's because I revere Rick so much, because I was aware of him at such a young age and have watched his progress all these years, so I have been a bit starstruck.
It's okay.
Well, I'm always delighted to hear that I've had an effect on people. I do get a lot of emails from people, and many times in my career of gaming, I did sometimes, when it got a little thirsty and people were just, more picks, more gaming. How big are you going to get? I was like, maybe I just stop publicizing and just do it for myself. And then I'd get an email from some young guy that would say hey, I just saw your pictures and it really inspired me and it helped me think about my own gaming journey. And that's why I've just kind of stayed in it this long, is just to show people you can game long term and still have a healthy outlook on life, and be happy to be single. I'm single. I've had relationships before. I'm single now, but I'm okay being by myself, not alone, by myself, until I find someone that fits into my life. So, I'm happy to hear that people have had, my kind of exposure as their first kind of thing. And I hope that I've, been a good role model to kind of keep people, always asking questions about themselves. So yeah, I'm always touched when people say that. So, and very, very, very touched that you reached out. And yeah, I'm more than willing to come back, as you can tell, I have a lot of opinions on a lot of these things.
Listeners, welcome to the podcast, sfgutmuscle, our new honorary third co-host, who honestly,
stories, what?
Yeah, mate, we will get you back as often as we can make our schedules align, because I think we've had an absolute pleasure having you here today. I think the listeners would love to hear from you again. But
thank you. Yeah, thank you again for asking me. I'm really happy to be here, and I think you guys do a great job. I've listened to the podcast and I really enjoy it. So.
Thank you so much. I'll tip. Listen, you can't see this. I think Tim, you can't see. He's currently swimming in his own drool. He's barely keeping afloat.
He's listened to us.
So, and maybe this part goes without saying, but Rick,
I'm verklempt.
Rick, where can the listeners find you online?
Oh, well, I'm not online at all.
We covered this. You're a very mysterious figure, and you don't actually exist. You're a myth. I'm on Instagram, and almost all the time you'll find me under sfgutmuscle, because I try and always do that so it's consistent, so people don't kind of take advantage of like, oh no, I'm him. So you can find me on sfgutmuscle on Instagram. I'm on Grommr. I'm on BellyBuilders. I'm on BiggerCity. Well, I'm on BiggerCity. I'm on Tumblr. There's some content on Tumblr. There's some YouTube videos that are out there under sfgutmuscle. I also do have a Patreon site, and I always tell people I don't expect people to sign up to it. I never push people towards it. It has multiple levels, and you don't get any porn content on it. But if people want more, I feel that I'm curating all my old content, making lots of new content, and it's a little bit of scratch. You help me kind of make it worth my time to kind of put all that together and give you more. So yeah, but that's never a thing that I whoever wants to show up can show up. That's how I feel about it. I never push it on people, and I'm always going to put stuff on Instagram. So if you want to see more of me and see some stuff, I do Instagram lives too. There's recorded Instagram lives under my account that you can go to and hear my story over and over again, because people ask. So so I've been more than willing to share it with people. But yeah, I'm out there. So, and you can always reach out to me, please. So many people are like, oh, I didn't know if I should talk to you because you're such a celebrity. I'm like, I'm just a boy with a full fridge looking for another boy who wants to empty his fridge into me. So, it's a simple thing. But yeah, I'm always open to talking to anybody. And if anyone has questions about their own journey and stuff like that, yeah, reach out to me on Instagram. I'm more than happy to chat with you. So gorgeous. Well, that's a wrap for now here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave a good review. If you liked this episode, I hope you do. Jesus Christ, what content. But if you like this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BeefyFrat at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, and BeefyFrat at ThiccMouse. You can also look us up on TikTok at Thicc Radio, or our website at www.podpage.com/Thicc Radio. And if you want to submit any questions or ideas for episodes, you can reach us at thethiccradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, everybody.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Anchor app podcast produced by Stan and Thicc Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by Stan.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify.